Zoom.
We're starting.
Is when.
Good afternoon. This is the Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session. This is a regular meeting. It is Wednesday, January 11th, 2023. It is 3:03 p.m. The session is set to go until 4 p.m. This is a hybrid meeting. We're in the atrium, 3000 Pacific Avenue Southeast, room 110. For public virtual attendance, you may follow along on the Thurston County YouTube channel. I'm Carolina Mejia. I'm the chair of the board. To my right is Vice Chair Ty Menser. To my left is Commissioner Gary Edwards. Also in the boardroom, we have County Manager Ramiro Chavez, as well as Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell. We have Director of Community Planning and Economic Development, Jessica Cummings, and Ashley Arai, who's our Agricultural Community Program Manager, as well as Chris Chapeau, who's our Community Planning Manager.
So I'll take it away here. Thank you for the introductions, Chair Mejia. We've got a big universe of agriculture issues that are happening right now in Thurston County, and the Board of County Commissioners has directed our staff to look at the big projects. We've got the community-driven agriculture and lots of different other topics that we're all working on. One of the things that's important as we're thinking about the larger universe is to also look at those steps that we can take in the near term that will impact farming and farmers in our community. And what you're gonna hear today is one of those great next steps that we can take for people that wanna become new farmers. So we have our critical areas, that's wetlands and steep slopes. And the way that is built in the Development Services Group and Brett's group, the current planning, is it's for land use for building residences and commercial buildings. It's not necessarily to look at how you might mitigate those impacts for people that wanna become new farmers. And so we've seen that as a gap for helping folks that wanna be new farmers in our community to use agricultural land. And that's what this is addressing. So it's a narrow piece of the larger topic of agriculture in our community, and I think it's a real nice win potentially as the board reviews the issue for folks that want to become new farmers. And you'll see that the Planning Commission, I'm taking all of Ashley's thunder right now. You'll see that the Planning Commission has voted a recommendation of 9-0 unanimous to pass this new code and ordinance so that we can help new farmers. So we'll let Ashley and Chris get into the details, but I just wanted to take this quick moment. I know you guys have had a lot of meetings these past couple of days to really get to the nuts and bolts of what this topic is. It's a good thing for new farmers.
Thank you, Josh. And as you mentioned, this is just one key piece of the community-driven review of agricultural policies and programs, which we fondly call CPA 16. This one is actually a development code amendment, docket item A18, agriculture activities critical areas. Next slide. So today I do plan to give what I hope will be a brief project overview, share what we heard from stakeholders. We did pretty extensive stakeholder outreach and what the Planning Commission recommends. And then the next step will be setting a public hearing. Next slide. So before we dive into the fun stuff, I'm just gonna give you a little bit of background. I'm gonna try to keep this high level since we do have a board briefing scheduled in a few weeks on February 1st to specifically talk about the voluntary stewardship program. Back in 2011, the state created VSP. It's an incentive-based program for existing farms. It is designed to balance the protection and enhancement of critical areas while also promoting agricultural viability. Shortly thereafter, the county enrolled all the watershed basins here in the county into VSP, and in 2017, our first VSP work plan was approved. In 2020, the board docketed an item to update Thurston County Code chapters 1715, agriculture activities critical areas, as well as Title 24, critical areas ordinance, to integrate with VSP and address any new agricultural uses that fall outside of the program. Next slide, please.
So just real quick, so VSP, Voluntary Stewardship Program, essentially is of great help to people that are already farming.
Yes, yeah. So who will this code update impact? So VSP, as Josh just mentioned, covers existing ongoing agricultural activities. And just so you're aware, that actually includes repair, maintenance, and replacement of things like a barn, fences, and things of that nature.
VSP does?
Yeah, repair, replace it.
But
Repair,
doesn't
replacement,
cover a new
maintenance.
farm?
Doesn't cover new farms, so it doesn't cover new or expanded agricultural activities or facilities. In those cases, the Growth Management Act does require counties to adopt development regulations that protect critical areas for these projects. So the list you see up here would fall into the new category. I'm gonna spend just a little bit of time going through these because this stuff is confusing. So it would cover lands converted to agriculture after July 24, 2012. So that's when our critical areas ordinance was adopted. New agricultural facilities built on an existing or new farm. So this includes everything from a new fence or manure storage facility on an existing farm to a brand new farming operation. The third one up there, expansion.
Let me ask you, you mean you have to get permission to build a fence?
If it falls within critical areas.
So if you wanna build a fence like through a wetland or steep slope, you gotta get a permit.
Or within 100 feet of a wetland or 200 feet?
Buffer.
That's what we currently have.
And
is-
this is what we're trying to fix.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Um,
I'll try to be quiet.
yeah, no,
It's a good
it's
question.
fine.
It's just,
You're hitting at why farmers have been frustrated.
It's been hard, when it comes across this, we don't have the tools to allow what they wanna do, and this is adding that tool.
So the last one up there is an expansion of agricultural facilities on existing farmland. So this would include any expansion beyond the original footprint of, let's say, a barn. So if you want to put up a hay shed, lean-to connected to your barn, it would also fall in the new category. And this is following the State Conservation Commission's guidance on what is existing and what is new. So our options at the county are to regulate these projects with our standard critical area protection provisions, which is in place today, or utilize a conservation planning approach. So based on everything we learned from our research into what other counties are doing and what the state recommends, and what we heard from our farmers and the Planning Commission, staff developed a conservation planning approach. Next slide, please. And just to quote directly from what the state includes in their critical areas ordinance guidance handbook. Conservation plans are intended to help agricultural operators maintain productive and economically viable ag land while protecting and enhancing critical areas and water quality, using the best available science and effective mitigation measures. And so the state's guidance does say that conservation plans can effectively reduce impacts from farm activities on natural resources with solutions that are unique to each farm to avoid or minimize adverse impacts with mitigation techniques. Next slide, please. The conservation planning approach also builds on our VSP program by balancing the protection of critical areas and working farmlands. This option would be voluntary. Farmers could always choose to go through Title 24, the Critical Areas Ordinance, as a default. Conservation planning also provides more flexibility and opportunities to incentivize conservation enhancement projects like the ones that the state is currently funding through their cost share, and climate mitigation activities. Next slide, please. So on that note, the proposed code amendment package includes changes to two sections of our code. The first would be repeal and replacement of the old agriculture activities critical areas, chapter 1715. And the other includes minor edits to Title 24 critical areas ordinance. So the new 1715 details out the conservation planning option for those new agricultural activities and facilities we covered. So it contains a new purpose statement and definitions that are agriculture focused. Has new sections clarifying existing, ongoing versus new agriculture uses. We've also included provisions that remove barriers to getting conservation enhancement projects and climate mitigation activities on the ground. And then the remaining provisions detail out farm conservation plan standards, monitoring, and compliance. The proposed updates to Title 24, in contrast, are relatively minor. Since the critical areas ordinance would be the default option, the references and use tables had to be updated to include new agricultural activities and facilities. Next slide, please. So this is just a brief overview of what a farm conservation plan includes. And I just wanted to share how the review process would work. So a farmer who wants to expand one of their facilities or establish a new farm would team up with a technical service provider, like the Thurston Conservation District, to prepare a farm conservation plan that mitigates for any identified impacts to critical areas on the site. Mitigation measures would be customized and unique to the farming operation, and they could include approved natural resource conservation service practices or other scientifically vetted BMPs. Some of these common conservation practices include things like seasonal pasture grazing in sensitive habitats, exclusionary fencing around those wetland buffers, covered manure sheds for nutrient management or forested riparian buffers. The county would still be responsible for approving, monitoring, and enforcing the plan to ensure no net loss on a site-specific basis of those critical area functions and values. If it turns out the conservation practices aren't working, the county will work with the farmer and their technical service provider to adapt them. And then next slide, please. So we were able to have great conversations with all the groups listed up there, and we are really appreciative of all of them taking the time to inform this proposed package of code amendments. Their insights into current permitting challenges, the planning capacity, and ideas for structuring the conservation plans and review process have been invaluable. And then next slide.
Just curious
Oh,
as to why Whatcom County Conservation Program is part of the stakeholders.
Yeah, they have one of the most extensive conservation planning programs in terms of working with their farms.
But learning their practices.
Learning their practices, how they actually implement it, to help inform how current planning will potentially take this and run with it. And yeah, they were great. Awesome resource. And then we had two work sessions with the planning commission. The first one was just, it was a concept conversation, and it was more of a brainstorming session with them. And we followed that up once we had draft code amendments with a work session. And after holding a hearing, they unanimously recommended approval of the amendments. And then at this point, I'm just open to questions.
Can we go back to the conservation planning slide, maybe, please? That one, that one. Farm conservation plan. That's really the nuts and bolts. So that's where Brett's group, somebody comes in, they've got a growth area, they can work with them, the conservation district, and the plan comes out and they say, yep, we think that makes sense. We're gonna go out, take a look, monitor, make sure the fence is in the right spot, and then they can proceed. We don't have that tool right now, and that's essentially what this request is, to take the public hearing to that next step, to offer that tool.
And so I spoke with the Thurston Conservation District and kind of asked, and they did let me know that they had provided a lot of feedback on this. And one of the programs that they told me about was the Frogs on Farms that they're working on with farmer Jake Yancey. And they were telling me, that's a good example of a good interface between like the critical areas and farming, and how those two can work together. And so, I'm gonna open it up for questions.
Maybe a follow-up on the comment about the frogs on the farm. When you talk about fencing and grazing and all that, it's my understanding, like using the spotted frog from a endangered species perspective, I guess, that grazing those grasslands when there's less water during a dry time is beneficial to the egg-laying benefit of the frogs in the wet times. So is all that type of thing taken into consideration while you're putting this all together? I mean, so that you don't try to do one good thing and
So
that creates a bad thing somehow?
correct, we made sure that we were working hand in hand with the HCP to make sure that what we put in the HCP that was adopted here recently took into consideration the BMPs that we were already looking at in this new amendment to Title 1715 and vice versa. So there is a cross connection for all of that information, making sure that we didn't trip over ourselves.
How does this fit with the Hearst decision when we're in these flow areas that have been reduced on daily draw?
So that's
to allow
outside of this
people-
particular.
Pardon?
That's outside of.
Well, I know, but I mean, how can we expect a farmer to be a farmer if we can't have any water?
And
And
what,
so how does that play into this?
So that's stream flow restoration, and we'll have a briefing and discuss those types of projects.
Yeah, but if we're trying to encourage farming, that's what I'm kind of trying to get to. If we're encouraging farming, we've got to look at that as maybe, I don't know, some kind of dry farming, they can't use water.
So we definitely should and are going to look at that, but that's not part of this tool.
That has nothing to do with,
But it's
I
all
think it's
connected.
it's two different parallel.
Yeah.
They eventually will meet at some point, but I think this is more of a land use
and I guess,
strategy allowance for the activity to happen in a certain piece of property. That's really what this does.
but if it's a problem, the legislature should, I suppose, hear about it at some point, if it is. I mean,
Right.
I'm hoping that's what'll happen, so I don't know how we can encourage and at the same time impose detrimental restrictions, that's all.
So this is not restriction.
This is not gonna cause a problem on that either.
This is to help remedy a problem. And you know, to your point, the plan could have things included that help stream flow restoration. That's a potential that the plan could include some of that. But what we're talking about right now is what those plans allow for.
Okay.
It's a good question because it's all connected. Water flows through everything.
Yeah, I want to highlight, because I think this is exciting as far as ag is concerned. So the state has been allocating more funding to conservation enhancement projects and climate smart activities. NRCS just issued a whole new batch of conservation practices specifically tied to climate smart. And this code change will remove permit barriers for farmers trying to get those projects on the ground and take advantage of all the cost share.
In
cost
relation
sharing.
to the critical areas.
Yeah, it's specifically
So,
related to
that's
critical
really
areas.
what is, the critical areas, Commissioner Messer stated, wetlands, buffers, 100 foot, 200 feet, 300 feet buffers. Under the current conditions, no farm activities will occur there.
It's difficult.
It's difficult. So this will allow the flexibility to get into those critical areas and the buffers to allow and expand the agricultural facility. So in a way, this is an incredible flexibility option the board has to provide agricultural activities in the county.
So basically, we're making it easier to get agricultural permits for establishing or expanding farming in critical areas.
Exactly.
That's what I led with.
So I know I asked for the VSP briefing and we're not there yet, but I have to ask this because it connects to my understanding of this. So currently, does VSP only apply to agricultural activities?
Existing ongoing agricultural activities, and that definition under the state includes existing facilities and that are,
That's all VSP applies to?
Correct.
yes.
And now we're expanding that to expanding the scope of essentially, this sounds like a VSP type of situation.
It builds on that. There are some differences. So VSP looks at a watershed basis in terms of our ongoing monitoring that we have to do. In this case, we have to look at sort of site-specific no net loss rather than sort of a water code. Once a new farmer complies with this farm conservation plan option, and they mitigate for any impacts, they would then be folded into VSP. So yes, in answer to your question, it does expand VSP, and it
then-
is similar.
And if I were a property owner that wanted to build a office in a buffer, I can't do that. And this, there's no office conservation plan or something like that. So this is an exception for agricultural activities because at a policy level, we want to encourage agriculture.
So, yeah, it's less of an exception to how we do it and more of creating. Right now, if a new farm came to us, we would have a round peg and we'd have to try and stuff it into a square hole. And what we're trying to do is create that round hole that that round peg can fit into. So this particular amendment will allow us to create, the farm conservation plans should look at as a special report. So if a development came in and said, we're gonna have impacts to a wetland, we would require them to do a critical area report,
Right.
to do a critical area review. It's very much development centric, all of the requirements are, and it's very hard for a farmer to meet all those requirements. What we're doing is taking creating that special report requirements so that a farmer can meet those requirements and make sure that we are protecting our critical areas while allowing the farming activities to occur. Because we know,
Yeah.
like for the Oregon spotted frog, there are some farming activities that may look like in our current ordinance an impact, but are actually beneficial done of the appropriate way that are for that particular species.
So you hit it with the square peg, round hole. So right now, like I said at the beginning, our critical areas ordinance is based on if you wanna build something, not based on if you wanna farm something. So this creates the round hole for farming something, which we don't currently have for the critical
But
areas.
we're talking about building a fence or building a lean-to or
But
building
not a
barn.
resident or a commercial structure. Our current CAO, you can farm in those areas, but you've gotta go through the CARP process, the critical area review permit, for building a structure like a house or a commercial building.
Right.
Not talking about fences or things like
Which
that.
includes mitigation.
Yeah.
And that is
exactly.
that is the most expensive way to mitigate the impacts. In this case,
There are special ways to. do
special
those
ways to
things.
avoid mitigation.
And the
That's
carp,
really at the
the
end.
carp is expensive and takes a lot of time.
The what?
The CARP, the critical area review permit that she just talked about, that's what a farmer would have to do now. That's what they have to do currently. They've gotta go through our building, critical area ordinance review process, and that's long and expensive and doesn't fit with farming activity. So if you're not building, you're farming, this is gonna make it easier to farm. We don't currently, when somebody says, I wanna start a farm or expand a farm, we say, okay, that topic has to go into this review for building stuff, like a house or a commercial building.
You said it's development centric.
That's the
What do
building
you
or
mean?
house.
Can you just expand on that? What does that mean specifically that doesn't apply well to farm?
Right, so when I say development centric, I'm talking about standard development for subdivision or residential property, single family residential property or commercial property. That's what I mean by when I say that it's development centric. When we think of development, we think of commercial or a house. We don't think of a farmer who decides that within this critical area, I need to plow some land and crop or put my farm or my hay barn here, or I need to make sure that my manure shed is close to where my manure needs to be spread or where I'm collecting that manure.
So we make it hard for the farmer to do the right thing right now.
Correct,
That's,
Yeah.
that's
And
the bottom line.
There, a very specific example that the Thurston Conservation District brought to my attention the first time I met with them was an existing ongoing farm is allowed to have a big manure pile. They are, I mean, they're under VSP. When the Thurston Conservation District wants to go get cost share funding to put up a manure storage shed to cover that pile, that would actually, this shed would benefit our critical areas and would be a conservation practice, you'd have to get a reasonable use exception
Which is the expensive.
exactly.
through the hearing examiner. And so it's those, so even when we want a conservation enhancement project to take place, like fencing to exclude animals from a stream or a buffer, you need a reasonable use exception under our current code because a fence is considered a new ag facility. And so it's those kinds of things where like, but we want this. And like, we're not encouraging it or incentivizing it. There's money to do this and you can't
Our code doesn't allow
get
it
through it.
in the same way.
So this allows a farmer to take advantage of that funding, get those conservation projects on the ground.
It's exciting.
Yes.
Then it comes down to mainly streamlining because it's administrative review as opposed to hearing examiner's review.
Yeah, with this conservation plan.
Right.
Yep.
Will this conservation change? Will it help like that, we had a lot of testimony yesterday about that. Ayub,
Dancing Goat Farm.
Farmer
Yeah.
Ayub.
would, he's doing something different apparently than anybody even knows about, but I mean, when I was sitting, next to
Robin.
Robin yesterday, she looked up,
Hugelkultur,
what was the name?
Hugelkultur.
Yeah, well, it was an odd spelling and, but it looked like it was very common in Europe.
Germany.
So to give a,
I mean, would
Answer
it
that-
help in that situation?
we wouldn't wanna speculate on a topic with public health, we wanna engage with it.
But the thing is, what happens is the state law needs to get cut up.
Need to catch up? Yeah, I think
They
we're
get
behind
caught
the
up
scene.
with
Yeah.
the new industry, perhaps, or the new methods, means and methods to farm. And until then, it's really, it's
Well, that's what I'm wondering, if this will make it easier.
So on that, that farm is part of our volunteer stewardship program. I do know he's interested in putting up one of these manure sheds. Right now, he would have to go through
If we
potentially.
get this passed, he'll be able to do it
He'd
easier.
be able to do it through a
Okay.
conservation plan, which he's already in the process of getting. And so that would be great for him
What
and
about
other.
properties? Now, that property was originally part of a farm years and years ago. And then, like, even right across the road is that, it's still in ag, but he's raising some kind of plants and those elevated not elevated,
High tunnels?
covered.
So we don't
Yeah.
wanna step too
Yeah.
deeply into it
Yeah.
without
Oh,
public
okay.
health engagement.
Oh, no, yeah, sorry, I was just trying to clarify the
No,
term.
no pun intended.
Anyway, I mean, that place had been used as a farm for 100 years, but it was growing
next
Public
steps.
cows and oats or something. But it's still ag, they're just doing something different.
So unless the board has any additional
I don't- no,
questions,
So
we
if
will.
the
Sounds good.
board is ready to move forward, we can have this added to one of our agendas to set a public hearing on it, or if the board needs more information, we still have 30 minutes.
Oh,
Or if we quit early, we can do something else.
Or I can do something else. So, Commissioner Edwards, we'll start with you, sir.
And questions?
No, do you want to move forward?
Oh,
or
I'm
do
ready
you-
to move forward, yeah.
Okay.
Ashley, are we ready to move forward?
Okay, that's fine.
So
I
you
will
will see an
say
AIS
yes.
and setting a public hearing on this item.
And the
Thank
planning
you.
commission
And
says we're ready
the
to.
9-0, so that's,
That almost fell out of the chair.
See, I think this is the first time that a development code docket has been done in 30.
Excellent, good job, team.
okay, well, thank you.
do you want to talk, Hugo?
Hey, Ashley, you know a little bit